and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to discuss something a little bit different than we normally do. You know, usually we focus here on Ag PhD about trying to raise the best crops possible, and we'll get into some of that today as well. But we also need to focus on what can we do that's the right thing for the environment, and we especially wanted to spend some time on riparian buffer strips and talk about the management of those today.
Well, that'd be a nice thing to put around some sorghum fields, Brian. We're going to talk about sorghum today. It's a crop that we don't really talk about a whole lot on the show, and there aren't quite as many options of things to do as there are in something like corn or soybeans. But there are some interesting things with sorghum that could help you raise better crops on your farm. We'll share those today.
We have a difficult to control weed of the week coming up later in the show. But first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
Well, a few months ago, Darren, I was reading a newspaper. This was a major national newspaper, and the title of the article included the words, Agent Orange Corn.
Well,
oh my goodness.
They aren't trying to scare anybody out there, are they, Brian? You know, when you think about Agent Orange, if you're under 20 years old and you've never heard about this at all, Agent Orange is considered a pretty bad thing because in Vietnam, they sprayed it right over the top of some troops who were out there going through the jungle. It did a great job of burning all the vegetation down in that jungle. That was nice. The problem is that some people got cancer 10 years, 20 years, 30 years later after exposure to it.
Yeah, okay, so let's just talk about this a little bit. This is something that our dad is very passionate about, and a lot of farmers are, because number one, he served in the military. Okay, so that's a bad thing when we had a bunch of military people who were hurt by something that the government did in going out spraying. But secondly, he's also passionate about it because he says, you know who paid the lawsuit bill? I said, no. He goes, farmers. I'll tell you how, because Dow Chemical ended up paying for that Agent Orange thing, and it wasn't their fault. It was an off-label application. You weren't supposed to spray it right over the top of the people, but for some reason, Dow got stuck paying the bill. And anyway, he said the very next day after the settlement came out, guess what happened to the national price on 2,4-D to farmers? Doubled immediately, just like that. So he said, we as farmers ended up paying the bill. Now, I don't care who paid the bill today. This is 40 years ago. What I do care about is we don't have Agent Orange anymore, and let's talk about why Agent Orange was a problem even back then.
It's interesting to note that there are some different ingredients that went into that product. It wasn't just one straight ingredient, and there were some contaminated ingredients in that particular one.
Yeah, so 2,4-D made up half of Agent Orange, and 2,4,5-T was the other half. The problem came in that the 2,4,5-T happened to be contaminated with dioxin, which is a very toxic chemical. So that's obviously a bad thing. But the 2,4-D side of it, that's actually relatively safe. In fact, if you look at the LD50 right on the label of 2,4-D, it's 1,000 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. In other words, it's going to take about 5 times more 2,4-D to kill you than it is caffeine, because the LD50 on caffeine is only 200. And over all these years that 2,4-D has been used, it's never been found to cause cancer. There's not that problem. Now, I'm not saying don't be careful with it, but what I am saying is 2,4-D should absolutely not be referred to as Agent Orange because it's not going to kill people.
Well, the reason this is all coming up is because Dow is coming out with corn, soybeans, and cotton over the next few years that are going to be tolerant to 2,4-D. So you can spray 2,4-D in the crop, and it'll do a great job burning down weeds, but it won't hurt those crops because they'll have genetic tolerance for 2,4-D. So there are a lot of people in the environmental world that are getting nervous about this, that, oh boy, here's a new product that farmers are going to be able to spray on corn. It's a genetically modified crop, and they're going to spray it on beans and cotton too. We need to be concerned about that, and we need to put up a fight.
Yeah, and our whole thing is you need to know the facts going into this thing. There is no Agent Orange anymore. The 2,4-D that was in Agent Orange, there was nothing wrong with it in the first place. Now, obviously, it's not labeled to spray over the top of human beings, but it's not this big cancer causer or anything else. That was something else that was in that Agent Orange. And obviously, biotech crops, they're safe. They've been proven by our government time and time and time and time again that they are safe. All the science that's come out on the biotech crops shows that they're safe to human beings, so don't get all worried about some of the misleading headlines that say Agent Orange corn is out, that's absolutely not true.
One thing, Brian, that is unfortunately true is that our weed of the week is infesting fields across the country. Can you identify this week's weed?
You can't fill a barrel any fuller than its lowest stave, and your crops can't do any better than the nutrient that's in shortest supply. Your yield potential is only as good as the weakest nutrient in your fertilizer program. Give your crops more than just NPK. Prescription apply all the micronutrients your crop needs, each one customized for your crop's potential. MicroLink, linking yield to potential.
For lower cost, higher production, Mandaco Agri leads with versatility unmatched. Twister is the vertical tillage unit for no-till as well as conventional tillage. Twister's ease of maintenance is forgiving in rocks and has contour conformity equaling zero downtime. Our hydraulically adjusted coulter angles make residue management easier, less costly. Spring or fall, the Mandaco Twister vertical tillage unit is the new leader. See your Mandaco Agri dealer. Visit northcountrymarketing.biz or call.
Looking to maximize yield? Quick Roots is a microbial seed inoculant that allows the plant root to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. Quick Roots continues to generate yield response on corn, soybeans, wheat, and more. Quick Roots is applied to the seeds so the live microorganisms go right to work, enhancing seedling vigor, increasing the uptake of certain nutrients, including NPK, and expanding root volume. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your local dealer and get your Quick Roots today.
There are more mouths to feed than ever before. What are farmers doing to meet the challenge? They're using agronomically designed equipment from Case IH. Our Quadtrac technology, soil management, and planting systems are designed to foster a better growing environment that helps farmers maximize yield potential. And our deep understanding of agriculture is preparing them for the challenges ahead. Will you be ready?
I'm ready.
Go to caseih.com to learn more.
Back in 1966, Advanced Drainage Systems, Inc. was the first company to start manufacturing plastic agricultural drainage pipe in the United States. And today, ADS continues our leadership with superior pipe production and service capabilities. Our roots are firmly entrenched in the agriculture industry, and we're committed to helping farmers grow their business. With 54 manufacturing plants and 24 distribution yards throughout the world, you can count on ADS and our green striped pipe to be there when you need us. Advanced Drainage Systems, the green striped pipe you can count on.
On Ag PhD, we spend a lot of time talking about corn, soybeans, and wheat because those three crops are on the most acres in the United States. But today we wanted to focus on sorghum and talk about what it takes to raise a better crop.
Well, when it comes to raising any crop, we have to look at a number of different factors, from weed, disease, and insect control to just starting with fertility and what it takes to feed that crop properly.
In terms of the fertility, that's perhaps the most important thing whenever I look at any crop. If you don't have the food, then there's no way that crop can grow well. So with sorghum, we would suggest you download our Ag PhD fertilizer removal app. We do now have sorghum on that app. And if you take a look at that, when you start talking about sorghum and grain removal at 50 bushel sorghum, you're talking roughly 20 pounds of phosphate and 15 pounds of K2O potassium. So those numbers, Darren, really aren't that high.
Well, they don't seem that high, but you have to think about it this way. I don't care what crop you just raised, chances are there's no fertility left. You know, if you're doing some soil sampling and saying, you know, we had some drought last year, so there's some extra fertilizer out there, okay, I could understand that. But most years, there's probably not going to be a whole lot left. And what we like to do is fertilize each crop that we put out there and bring the fertilizer along with it. That way we know for sure that we're at least putting back what we're removing from the soil, so long term our soils stay as good as they've always been or better. But the other thing is we know the availability is going to be better if you have newly applied fertilizer versus some that may have been tied up that could be carryover from last year.
The other thing is when we talk about P and K, it's basically in ratio to the bushels. So in other words, if let's say you had 100 bushel sorghum, you just double the numbers. So now you're up to 40 pounds of phosphate and 30 pounds of K2O potassium. Now that's just for grain removal only. Obviously you have to produce the forage too. You have to produce the leaves and the stalk and everything else in that sorghum. 50 bushel sorghum, roughly that stover is going to take about 10 pounds of phosphate and 45 pounds of K2O potassium. So sorghum is a lot like corn, as I'm sure you're well aware. They're both grass crops and they both take a tremendous amount of potassium to raise a good stalk.
Well, that's not it, Brian. It's not just N, P, and K. You also have to keep in mind sulfur, the other secondary nutrients like calcium and magnesium if that applies in your area or if your soils aren't blessed with plentiful amounts of those nutrients. And then, of course, micronutrients. And when we look at micros, yes, we don't need a lot of pounds of them, but they're very important with many of the functions from photosynthesis to pollination, all the way through to grain fill. So it's important that you have a few dollars in your budget for those micronutrients and secondary nutrients like sulfur. That can make a big difference in your crop production.
Just like with corn, there are different types of sorghum. So corn, for example, there's field corn, there's sweet corn, there's several different types of corn. With sorghum, you're going to have grain sorghum, or otherwise called milo. You'll also have forage sorghum, there's sorghum Sudan grass, a lot of different things. And when we start talking about herbicides that you can use on sorghum, not all of them are labeled on all the different types of sorghum.
Well, here's the important thing. If you're planting sorghum, get concept treated seed because that allows you to use a good pre-emerge herbicide like Outlook, for example, or you could use Dual and control those grasses. Because when we think about a grass crop, generally the toughest weeds to take out are those grass weeds. If we can wipe most of them out before they even emerge, hey, that's more than half the battle. Now we just have a few escapes that we've got to clean up later. So if you can use Outlook or Dual, you'll do a great job on grass control.
But the whole thing is, when I talk to a lot of sorghum producers around the country, they say, well, I don't get a lot of yield. I don't have a lot of rainfall here, so I don't want to spend much money. You should never, ever look at farm inputs as expenses. They are investments, and you want to take each individual investment and say, will that give me a good return? And in most cases, using a pre-emerge herbicide will give you a good return, especially when you're talking about a grass crop and trying to control grasses, which can dramatically reduce yield and tonnage. Now, the other thing, when we talk about this concept-treated sorghum, that's great for helping with Dual and Outlook, but it doesn't make any difference if your seed is treated or not treated. You can use atrazine pre-emerge. It's just we discourage the use of that. We'd like to have you use your atrazine post-emerge. And the main reason why is environmental. Because think about it, when you're planting your sorghum, there are no plants out there to absorb that atrazine when you spray it on. It's early in the season, so chances are you're getting more rain then. There's not as much sunlight then as later on in the season, and there's not as much heat as there is later on in the season. So all those factors mean more atrazine could get down into the groundwater with big rains, and that's not a good thing. So don't use your atrazine pre-emerge in sorghum. Use it post-emerge.
Well, there's certainly a lot of choices that you can do post-emerge, and atrazine is one of those things. But pre-emerge, again, if you can control all the grasses pre, now the broadleaves are a little bit easier to pick up. We do have some selection in post-emerge sprays.
All right, before we get to those post-emerge choices, let's finish up on the pre's. Sharpen and Verdict can both be used in grain sorghum. So either way you go, you're going to have pretty good broadleaf activity. Now, Sharpen does nothing for grasses, but that's where the Outlook or the Dual Magnum would be good choices.
And when we think about post-emerge broadleaf control, more guys have switched over to using Bucktril just because Bucktril's pretty safe. It doesn't have residual in the soil, so it's just going to kill what's up that day. So that's one of your options. Now, there are several other ones that we can talk about too.
A couple that have recently been labeled, that's Starane and Husky. Starane is excellent on kochia, not very good on much else though. With Husky, that is pretty good on a lot of different weeds. That's basically got Bucktril in it, and then another product that's similar to Callisto. It's just you got to be a little bit careful. If you spray too early, it can hurt the sorghum. If you spray too late, it can hurt the sorghum. Yes, it's a little bit more tricky.
The other thing you have though is you have some crop rotational concerns, especially if you're going into something like peas or lentils and other crops along those lines.
Yeah, so anyway, if you're talking about grasses post-emerge, we don't have a lot of good options here. That's why a lot of people for many years were using atrazine post-emerge to try to help on grass control. Atrazine obviously doesn't do much on grass. The much better choice, although much more expensive, is Paramount. That is an excellent product on many different grasses, including foxtails and barnyard grass, and Paramount does have some suppression on a number of different broadleaves as well. Okay, now a couple other things that may be on the market soon, that is tolerant sorghum to Assure or Fusilade. So in other words, you could actually go out and spray Assure 2 or Fusilade for very little money on your sorghum, and it would do an excellent job on grasses. However, Select Max and Post, the DIMs, will kill sorghum that is tolerant to, yes, Fusilade and Assure 2. So you have to make sure you use the right one. Now DuPont is developing that. They're also developing ALS tolerant sorghum, so you could go out and spray Accent on your sorghum. But both of these things, they're not labeled yet. We're expecting those fairly soon though, so hopefully they do end up coming out.
Well, it does get kind of complicated, Brian. It's not as easy as, well, you can spray this on any kind of sorghum at any time. There are certainly some restrictions. When we look at a crop that doesn't have as many acres produces what corn and soybeans do in our country, or wheat for that matter, there isn't as much emphasis placed on getting great herbicides that are very easy on the crop. So we don't have as many choices, and a lot of them come with some different qualifiers. So we'll have to put a list like this up on agphd.com at the resources tab.
Yeah, now one last thing I wanted to mention is insect control. There can be a lot of bugs in sorghum, and if you do have grain sorghum with quite a few insects, you can go out and spray things like Silencer, Lorsban, Mustang Max, or several other products that are labeled. And what I always tell people is, look, these foliar insecticides, they're dirt cheap. You're talking $2 to $4 an acre. It costs almost nothing. When you're out there spraying anyway, look for bugs first. If you got a whole bunch of harmful bugs out there, throw the insecticide in.
Now that's fine to say, Brian, with the pyrethroids, but you do have to be a little cautious with Lorsban. That can add some burn to some of the herbicide choices that you may have. So make sure you talk to your agronomist before you do any of this tank mixing to make sure there won't be any issues.
Well, when you are out there tank mixing, you might end up with our Weed of the Week. We'll tell you how to stop it on your farm coming up later in the show.
Today's number is 3. You can see it everywhere, and it can stand for almost anything. But when it comes to protecting the nitrogen that feeds your crops, 3 is the special number that sets Nutrisphere N, Nitrogen Fertilizer Manager, apart, because Nutrisphere N is proven to reduce all 3 forms of nitrogen loss, which adds up to keeping more nitrogen and yield where it belongs. So ask for Nutrisphere N, the stabilizer that fights nitrogen loss 3 ways.
For years, FarmLogic has been the easiest and most convenient way to keep up with your farming operations. Well, it just got better. Introducing FarmPad for your phone. You always have your phone with you, so entering records as they happen is as easy as a touch of a button. Chemical database, GPS, service records, and more. When you do it on the farm, save it on your phone and it's backed up forever. Call or visit farmlogic.com for a free trial and find out why FarmLogic is the best decision tool for the farm.
In the world of four-wheel drive tractors, there is no name more powerful than Steiger. The newest addition to the powerful Case IH Steiger line is the Steiger Rowtrack, available at Titan Machinery. Designed for row crop use, the Rowtrack provides more maneuverability and reduces compaction while maintaining power and performance. It's available with 16, 18, or 24-inch tracks for row spacing as narrow as 20 inches. Visit your Titan Machinery dealer today to learn more about the Case IH Steiger Rowtrack. Titan Machinery, better solutions.
Speed, strength, and efficiency make Capello corn heads a head above the rest. Built with polymer components that exceed industry standards, Capello corn heads continue to push the boundaries for maximizing grain retention while using less energy. Visit CapelloUSA.com and learn more about Capello's state-of-the-art chopping technology that cuts cleaner, allowing your horsepower to remain where it belongs, with your combine, so you can harvest faster in all weather conditions. Add to that an amazing folding feature, and it's clear to see why Capello is a head above the rest.
You expect a lot from this seed, and as it grows through each stage of development, Agriculture Liquid Fertilizers is there, feeding your crop exactly what it needs when it needs it. So no matter how you fertilize, no matter when, AgroLiquid efficiently brings all the nutrients your crop needs for a great harvest. From 1 kernel in the ground to 600 on the ear. For better yields and better quality, Agriculture Liquid Fertilizers.
We spend so much time here on Ag PhD talking to you about how you can raise better crops. I think it's also very important to focus on doing the right things for the environment. So Darren, let's talk a little about riparian areas, or basically buffer strips around waterways and rivers, lakes, things like that.
Well, we've got a great example right here in this field, Brian. We've got a hilly piece of ground that has rolling hills, and then all the water moves down to these waterways. We've actually got a stock dam here, we've got some trees there, we've got some tall perennial grasses, all trying to help preserve our land and keep water clean that's leaving our field. So let's just say there was a little bit of soil that washed off the hillside in a big rain. Now it's got to filter through some tall perennial grasses, and we can sort out all the things like soil that may have gotten in there, or crop residues, or maybe some fertilizer that may have just been spread on the ground, these kind of things.
Yeah, so one of the things I get frustrated with is, so I do a little bit of kayaking, not, anything major or whitewater or any of that kind of stuff, but just up and down a river that's near our house. Well, really not up the river, but down the river at least I do this. And anyway, it just frustrates me because I see some nice riparian areas, buffer strips, and then I also see some people that farm right up to the edge, and then every year when the river gets a little high, it takes more of their ground out, and I see stuff washing right out of their field, right into the river. That's frustrating because I also, as I drive around our area, see plenty of acres of CRP ground where the ground, quite honestly, could be farmed real easily. Why don't we take some of those CRP acres that are in good farmable areas and put those CRP acres right along the rivers? I don't understand why we don't do that, Darren. It just makes sense.
That's probably the big reason why it doesn't happen, because it makes too much sense. Now, when we think about it, what we're trying to do is, again, just protect the environment a little bit. And when you think about those areas that are maybe right next to a stream or right next to a river, they're probably not your most productive acres anyway. A lot of times you end up with some early flooding early on in the year, or when you have some big rains, you may have a washout in those areas or something like that. Why not preserve that land for the long period of time? So we aren't talking about taking up 10% of your farm ground or something like that, but maybe just a few strips right along rivers or streams or wherever your runoff from your field may end up.
So a lot of times what we're talking about here is 60 feet, within 60 feet of a river that's right next to you, or 100 feet, something like that. And especially having some perennial grasses rather than annual grasses, then having some shrubs, and then some trees. And the reason why you want to have all these different types of plants there is when you have runoff that's coming off your field, you need something to hold that soil in place, number one. Number two, you need to absorb some of the water and some of the different herbicides or whatever that might be coming in through there. So you've got to have a lot of plant material, and it's got to be growing most of the year and from year to year.
Now all of a sudden our rivers and streams are that much cleaner, and there's a lot less chance there's going to be some more regulation put on us in the future.
Well, whether we have regulations on this or not, we're probably always going to be dealing with our weed of the week. Can you identify this week's weed?
The Weed of the Week is sponsored by the Enlist Weed Control System from Dow AgroSciences, a new herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate.
You work to protect your farm's legacy and to keep it going. Introducing the Enlist Weed Control System, an advanced herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate for exceptional control of tough weeds. The next chapter begins.
Our weed of the week is Bristly Foxtail. It's an annual grass, similar to the other foxtails, Darren.
Well, Brian, people think we may be making up some different foxtail species, because there are a lot of them, and that's why some farmers just say, oh, it's pigeon grass, and lump them all into one category. But here's the thing. If you've got Bristly Foxtail, here's how you can tell the difference. When you look at the seed head, it kind of looks like it's broken up or roughed up a little bit, and the reason why is those short, stiff hairs actually point downward instead of upward like normal foxtail heads. And the reason that Bristly Foxtail does that is because now their seed head will catch on your clothing or catch on an animal as he runs by, and it can spread the seed. It's just a seed spreading mechanism. Otherwise, Bristly Foxtail looks an awful lot like green foxtail.
And the good news is it's really not that difficult to control. It's real similar to a lot of the other foxtails. So in soybeans, for example, it's pretty easy. Put down one of the yellows, Treflan, Sonalan, or Prowl. Follow up post-emerge with Select Max or another good grass killer. What do you suggest in corn?
Well, in corn, the grass killers like Harness, Surpass, Dual, Outlook do a nice job. If you're using a combination product like a Sure Start or Triple Flex because you want some more broadleaf activity, that's fine too. Just make sure your rate is sufficient, because if you've got a real cut rate of the grass herbicide, you won't be happy with your control on Bristly Foxtail.
In wheat, we always suggest starting with a good pre-emerge herbicide, and Prepare would be the best choice here. Then post-emerge, come back with something like Axial, and you should have pretty good success.
The other thing is, if you're in corn or soybeans that are tolerant to Roundup or Liberty, both Roundup and Liberty are very active on Bristly Foxtail, but they don't have any residual. That's why these pre's are so important for us. Another thing you could use in conventional corn too is Accent. There's no residual there to speak of. And in soybeans, you could certainly use Select Max post-emerge.
Well, that's it for our Weed of the Week, but stay tuned. Iron Talk is coming up next.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
What are farmers doing to feed the planet? They're using Quadtrac technology, soil management, and planting systems from Case IH to foster a better growing environment that maximizes yield potential. Visit caseih.com to be ready.
If you could prevent your first breakdown this spring before it even happens, you'd do it, right? In today's Iron Talk, we'll talk about the most neglected piece of farm equipment each spring, your sprayer. It's true, don't try to deny it. You've spent your time getting the planter, tillage tools if necessary, and your tractor's all ready for spring. The sprayer often just sits there until the last possible minute. Sure, you winterized it last fall if you're in an area with freezing temperatures, and no doubt you cleaned it out well at the end of the season too. Having the sprayer ready to go takes more than that though. So this year, a couple of weeks before you need the sprayer, or right away if the spray season's closer than that for you, start by putting a couple hundred gallons of water in your sprayer. Check for leaks in your hoses, ball valves, and everywhere else. Make sure you didn't miss a spot with your antifreeze, like a low spot or a filter bowl. Then, if everything else is good, move on to your spray tips. Do your calibrations and catch tests to make sure they're still putting out the right amount of product. Watch the spray pattern as well. If it's distorted, get some new tips. If your tips have been on for a few years, it's a good time to replace them as well. This year, get the sprayer ready a couple of weeks early if you still have time. It may prevent your first breakdown of the year and make the spray season go smoother all season long. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now, back to the show. Don't miss this year's free Ag PhD Winter Workshops. At Ag PhD, we're all about helping you raise better crops and earn more money on your farm. We'll talk about drought-proofing your crop, weed and rootworm resistance, how to improve your fertility program, and on-farm trials and field tests. We'll also tell you the good and bad about the new products and technologies on the market, and give you our recommendations for pest control and a host of different crops. You'll get some insights on new farm regulations and tax laws going forward, and as always, you'll receive a free agronomy manual. Learn more and sign up today at agphd.com.
Micronutrients are not optional for plants, they are essential. TJ Micromix is a profit-proven management tool that ensures the availability of essential secondary and micronutrients. Formulated as a dry granule or liquid, TJ Micromix is plant available, easy to mix and apply. The synergistic fertilizer mix delivers consistent yield response on a variety of crops by complementing an NPK fertilizer program. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your fertilizer dealer and get your TJ Micromix today.
For years, FarmLogic has been the easiest and most convenient way to keep up with your farming operations. Well, it just got better. Introducing FarmPad for your phone. You always have your phone with you, so entering records as they happen is as easy as a touch of a button. Chemical database, GPS, service records, and more. When you do it on the farm, save it on your phone and it's backed up forever. Call or visit farmlogic.com for a free trial and find out why FarmLogic is the best decision tool for the farm.
There are more mouths to feed than ever before. What are farmers doing to meet the challenge? They're using agronomically designed equipment from Case IH. Our Quadtrac technology, soil management, and planting systems are designed to foster a better growing environment that helps farmers maximize yield potential. And our deep understanding of agriculture is preparing them for the challenges ahead. Will you be ready?
I'm ready.
Go to caseih.com to learn more.
Closed captioning for Ag PhD is sponsored by Norwood Sales.
The all-new S-Cube commercial tender is the only tender on the market with poly tanks, giving you the capability to haul seed, fertilizer, water, or liquid fertilizer. Each cube can hold 300 units of seed, 2,000 gallons of liquid, or 300 cubic feet of fertilizer. Options include full functioning wireless remote, stainless steel conveyors, and self-contained hydraulics. Get yours today at Norwood Sales.
That's all the time we have for today's show, but be sure to join us again next time for another Weed of the Week, Iron Talk, Farm Basics, and much more. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.
75 to 95% of soil-applied phosphorus may be tied up and made unavailable to plants. Farmers use organic proteins and other fertilizer innovations to ensure their crops are fed properly. For more information, visit the Responsible Nutrient Management Foundation at rnmf.org.